Are you starting a garden this year? Maybe expanding your garden or just gardening in general? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about some mistakes to avoid when gardening, setting up your gardening space. For some background, my name is Tyler Lloyd. I've been gardening since I was a little child. And when I went to set up this garden, I thought I knew a thing or two, but I still made mistakes. So if you see a mistake that you can relate to, let me know in a comment. If you see something or you've done something that I don't talk about, please add to the conversation so we can all learn from each other's mistakes and not repeat them. So let's get to my first thing that I messed up when I was setting up this garden. I didn't think enough about the sun, which seems silly. You need sunlight to grow vegetables. But these garden beds that are back here up against this tree line, when I first started laying out this garden, it was going into fall. Well, the sun moves throughout the year, and I didn't take that into account. So when you are planning out your garden, think about how the sunlight is going to change, the angle of the sun. There's an app that I have called Photo Pills. It's a photography app, but you can use that to pick certain dates and see where is the sun going to be in the sky. Now, if you have tons of space and you can just plant out in an open field where there aren't any trees and you're not going to have any shading, great, do that. But if you are in an urban lot or trying to make the most of a space and maybe planting up against some trees, you need to think about the angle of the sun as it changes throughout the year, especially if you want to grow something that needs full sun. Make sure that it's going to be getting that sunlight and not obstructed in the summer. The next item on my list would be raised bed height. If you don't have mobility issues and you're able to get down close to the ground, do not make a tall raised bed. I've seen the nice metal ones that are 2-3 feet tall. Those can be very nice for the right person. But the taller you make it, the more matter you need to fill it. Even if you're using things like wood chips and logs, still got to fill that thing. These are a foot tall. These are 2x12s that I made these raised beds out of. I wish I had gone much shorter. I was a little bit worried about, the ground here. This was an old septic drain field. It's not currently where our septic system is. That's all different, but I wish I had gone much shorter. You can make a raised bed, a quote-unquote raised bed, with just some 2x4s, or maybe you don't even need to have a raised bed. Just grow directly in the ground if that makes sense for you, your soil, and where you're located. So don't make it taller than it needs to be. And we're going to stick on raised beds for a little bit. Let's talk about raised bed depth or width. How wide is the raised bed or your planting area? This raised bed right here is 4 feet wide, which is a great distance. From this one side, I can reach pretty much all the way across, but it's accessible by both sides. If you have a raised bed that is going to be up against a fence, do not make it 4 feet deep. You're going to have problems reaching. Even I have problems reaching, and I'm 6'3" tall. Let me show you. This bed right here is 4 feet deep. It's up against this fence, and I can't easily get over there without trampling through everything. If it's going to be against a fence, do not make it this deep, maybe only 2 feet. So think about that when you're setting up your raised beds. Along with the width of your raised beds, think about the distance between raised beds. Right here between these two beds is 4 feet, and I have 4 feet between these beds right here. This is kind of my main through channel in my garden where I move my wheelbarrow, so I wanted it to be nice and wide. I could have done probably 3 feet and got away with it, but because I also have this arch, I wanted to accommodate it, and it does pretty well with a 4 foot spacing. But these beds back here are only spaced 2 feet apart. I think it's a smidge greater than 2 feet. My intention was 2 feet, but my measurements were a little bit off. But 2 feet is a great distance for me to be able to kneel down between the beds. I could have gone a little bit closer, but think about that. What are you going to be moving through the area? Your garden cart, your wheelbarrow, having space to set down buckets. Think about the distance between your beds. And now for the biggest mistake that I think I made in this garden would be properly leveling out your beds. This whole garden is on a slant like this. So when I went to set my raised beds, I knew I had to try to, dig them in Well, I had already laid all this wood chip mulch, which is now broken down beautifully, and I may end up planting in a lot of it. But I did not dig out far enough to the ground when I went to level these out. So this is all worn away. Now I have this whole end of my bed exposed. So make sure you dig down and level it out to the ground. To fix this, I'm going to be getting some cedar fence posts to put on the front and the sides a little bit where it's exposed, so all my dirt doesn't keep spilling out. So take the time to properly level the area that you're going to be putting a raised bed. Don't be like me. Do you have rabbits in your area? Maybe a groundhog? Maybe a dog that likes to dig? Maybe it's not even your dog. Maybe it's a neighborhood dog. Install your fence before you need a fence. Now, I put this fence up before I needed it, but my other garden area that I expanded into last year didn't put a fence, and I had some problems with some groundhogs and some deer. Now, deer are definitely difficult to keep out. You need a really tall fence, but then I was fighting them all year in my second garden. So I'm going to be putting up a fence this year for it. But once you have pest damage for something, especially like a groundhog or a rabbit, they'll just go through and just level all your plants. They won't even eat all of them. They'll just cut them off at the base because they're cruel and unusual little terrorists. I mean, I don't mean that. I try to share the environment with the animals and plant extra, but it's just cruel. So put up your fence before you need a fence. Right now, it is cold and gross outside, and you may not be thinking about gardening or actually getting out and prepping your beds, but start soon. Start as soon as you can, because I've run into the problem 2 years in a row where I've been expanding my garden and I haven't had the garden expansion done by the time my plants are ready to go in the ground. So then I've got tomatoes that are getting too tall and leggy, and peppers that have outgrown their little pots. I'm having to pot stuff up. Start now and get your garden ready, especially if you're starting a new garden, because spring is right around the corner. So start getting those beds prepped before you plan to plant. Get them ready first and then get the plants. If you're starting your tomatoes 6 to 8 weeks before planting them out, make sure you're going to have those beds ready in 6 to 8 weeks. I know it seems common sense, but I've made the mistake 2 years in a row, so I'm not doing it a third time in a row. And speaking of those leggy tomatoes that I was talking about, don't start your plants too soon, especially any warm weather crop. I know you may be looking at your first frost date or your last frost date and being ready to plant right then, but you are almost better off planting a little bit late than too early, especially if you put stuff out too early and then you're going to have to rush out and cover them with a frost cloth. And from my experience, a tomato that is out, once it's nice and warm, not even having those cool nights, even if it's frost-free, it's going to do so much better. So don't start your stuff too early, be having to fight potting it up, putting it out a little too early, or just, cutting it close. Give it time. If you're in the more northern latitudes and you need every single day of your growing season, I feel your pain. I get it. I get very envious of people down in Florida and Texas. I'm in Kentucky. So maybe you need to look into some season extension, but just be mindful and don't try to rush it. If you're a first-time gardener, you may not know how big your plants are going to get. I get it. Even myself, having decades of experience, I often misjudge and pack things a little too close together. And then that's just not good. They're going to be too crowded. It's not going to have good airflow. So depending on the plant, you could run into some fungal issues. They're just going to be competing for nutrients in the ground because they're so close together. So look up your plant spacing, read the seed packet, maybe look into the square foot gardening method to have a little bit better understanding of how you can pack stuff in a raised bed while not overpacking it. So be cognizant of spacing out your plants. I know you want to make use of every single square inch, but you can overdo it and all your plants will suffer. How are you going to water your plants? Spring in Kentucky is wet. It's currently wet and squishy out in my garden right now. And it's hard for me to think of a time when there's not going to be enough water. But for the past 2 years, for whatever reason, it seems that we're getting a lot of good rain, everything's going well, and then for a month straight, nothing. Where are you going to get your water from? How close is your water to a water source? Hopefully you've got a long enough hose and maybe a water spigot that you can turn on. Maybe you've got rain barrels. Hopefully you're not going to have to be filling up buckets and watering cans and walking them out to where you're gardening. You can do it. It stinks. So just think about that when you're planning out your garden. Have a sort of a method to the madness of how you're going to water everything and keep it all alive. Your plants, most garden plants should be getting a 1 inch of water every single week. So be aware of that and have a plan for how to keep your little babies nice and hydrated. And those little plant babies, we love them. We care for them. We put them in the ground and we want to give them all the food and nutrition to grow big and strong. But with fertilizer, you can definitely overdo it. You can put too much too quick and just absolutely fry and burn your plants. You got to think about how much they can actually use. Putting down more fertilizer than they can use is either 1, going to fry your plants, or 2, it's not going to be held in the soil medium. When it rains, it's all going to be washed away and you're just going to be flushing away nice expensive fertilizer. So put things down that are going to break down slowly. Your compost, maybe things like blood meal, alfalfa for nitrogen, wood ashes for potassium. I think potassium, or is it phosphate? I will put the right answer right here. Bone meal is going to be for this. I prepare for these videos. Trust me, I do. But just think about your fertilization and don't overdo it. So just be mindful of that. I know we think, oh, more is better. No, more is not always better. Now, if you're starting a garden, ideally you want it to be sustainable. Sustainable in the energy that you're putting into it. And things that are sustainable are habits. Things that you do routinely day in and day out, like weeding, everybody's favorite task. It is much better to do a little bit every day rather than a whole bunch and burning yourself out every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, neglecting it and just being overrun by weeds. So make your gardening habit a daily, or maybe not daily if you can't fit it in your schedule, but just a routine habit to stay on top of the task. Because let me tell you, once your garden gets out of hand, it can be pretty demoralizing and you feel like giving up. So if you want to have a good, productive, sustainable gardening practice, make it a routine. Lastly, just be patient. Be patient with your garden, with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Don't overwhelm yourself with all the things that you need to do. It'll all come together. Or it won't, and you'll learn a lesson from that. So just be patient. I know when you're putting in your tomato plant and you're checking it every single day. Is it ripe yet? Is it ripe? Do I see even a flower? Okay, it's starting to flower. Just give it time. Let nature run its course. Be out there to steward and shepherd your garden to the best of your ability. But just be patient with your garden, with yourself, and extend a little bit of grace. So these are my 10 things. I think the list was 10 if you collapse all of the raised bed related things together, 10 or 13 depending on how you want to do the count. But that's my list of things that you should look out for and mistakes to avoid when starting a garden. Is there anything that I missed? What would you add to the list? Please leave it in a comment down below. Again, my name is Tyler Lloyd. I wish you the very, very best and a great gardening season. See you later.